important economic policy tool of the government, and it provides a comprehensive statement of nation's priorities. As representatives of the people, you are always our eyes and ears, and the opposition specifically then becomes the critical voice of the population as the alternative government to come up with pro-people priorities. In the situation we are in, Right Honorable Leader of Opposition, we are in a current fiscal squeeze as a country, but also as a whole globe, with a shrinking funding base, including the freeze of donor aid by USAID globally, and that has affected critical sectors, especially health and education in our country. The previous weeks, we saw Parliament debating failure of the Ministry of Education to come up with a A-level curriculum. The process of consultants was being funded by USAID. And the question that Parliament should be asking is who is going to cover the gaps of all sectors in health and education, especially where USAID funds have been withdrawn. Is the current budget framework taking care of that? I was waiting for the director budget to address that. I hope you will get back to that question. Because as a citizen, I expect government to cover its critical sectors like health and education and stop relying on donors and foreigners for these critical sectors of citizens. We have caused a lot of worry to the people living with HIV/AIDS. I know that after the first announcement of donor freeze, the HIV/AIDS clinics called their patients to pick medicine for 6 months. But the political statements going on can also cause some death. Because people living on these health drugs don't need to worry about, especially poor people. So if you have people worried about food, most people living with HIV/AIDS, what about a balanced diet? Now they've increased worry of uncertainty over medication. I would expect the leader of opposition and your cabinet, shadow cabinet, to make sure that these critical sectors are covered by government 100%. Whether USAID funds are restored or not, donor funds should go to less critical sectors, and health and education should be funded by government. We changes of public debt, skyrocketing public debt, amidst skyrocketing corruption in the country. The figures that come from the IGG as official funds lost corruption are worrying, but also we know that they are not complete. The money lost to corruption is beyond the 10 trillion that the IGG talks about, because the IGG survey did not cover money lost in procurement. Yet that's the biggest chunk of money. Fake deals, fake bidders, where government bids and gives contracts to themselves. That's the biggest chunk of corruption, money lost in this country. The opposition has a duty to offer voters a credible alternative to government in office and to make the majority accountable. I know that LOP and your committees, you chair the accountability committees. I've also seen the leads of these committees in the House, and you're doing a great work. What remains to be seen in the work of Parliament is recovery. Recovery of lost monies. We know that prostitution does not work in this country. We have rule by law, and the government only prosecutes those who oppose it and protects those that it considers their cadres. So it would be good for the leader of opposition and your shadow cabinet to move beyond handing over people to police and ordering recovery. instead. I think that would benefit a taxpayer more than other monies we spend on fake prosecutions that end in nothing, and that's also loss of taxpayers' money. I don't know whether the laws provide for that, but I'm sure any process can order recovery of money. And I think that would benefit us more as a country. I'm trying not to repeat what has been said, so when I slow down. So the duties of opposition, by their nature, are defined by political behaviors and rules. Just like a given, we have structured opposition in parliament and the authority. So I want to speak briefly about the authority of parliament. I know that the director budget touched on it. Some of us were at pain when the president wrote that letter on 26th June, or about there. It was published in Monitor on 26th June with a major headline, Budget Crisis. Museveni wants 750 billion reinstated. And part of the contents of this story was that the president read the Riot Act to our honorable members of parliament. You do not have power over the budget, he vowed. And then, of course, the actions that later happened by the leaders of this institution were unfortunate to some of us. The director budget has gone through the details of the laws. The president went ahead to describe the act of reallocating these funds as indiscipline, budget sabotage, and corruption. He further claimed that budget had interfered with the constitutional mandate of the finance minister. It's not unusual for the president to act outside the constitution. He always does. And he's only forced to act within the constitution by the people. So when he made such ridiculous claims that parliament has no budget, has no power over the budget, we kept watching as citizens on the stages that parliament would take. I know some of you tried to push back, but the tyrant of numbers overwhelmed you. But this act, and I saw recently Honorable Shakawanda referring to this letter, this act of ceding your constitutional powers to executive in the budget process, and the assumption, of course the wrong assumption, that parliament has no power to recommend amendments at committee stage was the most ridiculous, and in our view, the last stroke by the executive in taking away the power of parliament. It set a very bad precedent because the tyrant of numbers gave in to the demands of the executive, and I don't know how you're going to recover that power in this new process, or whether you can ask parliament to vacate its own decisions. I don't know, because that was wrong, irregular, and unconstitutional. Parliament has its powers to appropriate. First of all, an appropriation bill is a bill like any other bill of parliament. Under functions of parliament, under Article 78, when the executive presents a bill, you debate, propose, amend, and adopt. The wish of us as citizens was that you should have rejected that bulldozing by the executive over the budget, and then because once you pass it the second time, the president has nothing to do. In the worst case scenario, we had hoped that there would be a government shutdown, like we see in developed democracies. Because if the timelines for budget passes, like we see now, Trump is faced with a possible shutdown, a provisional approval of 30 days, if you had rejected for just one day, you would have sent the executive into shutdown. That's what is expected of parliaments. It needs to happen in this country for the citizens to feel the authority of parliament as the temple of democracy in the country. The numbers might not favor you, but the arguments favor you. The arguments favor you. The time history favors you. If we can't have a shutdown, let's have a walkout. So that it's registered that opposition proposed a shutdown, and because they were overwhelmed, they marched with their leader of opposition. Because what happened that day was unconstitutional. Parliament under Article 155 must review and recommend changes to the budget. If the executive had not agreed with the changes you proposed, they had time to disagree in the committees. And if they slept on the job, it should not have been your business as representatives of the people. You can imagine removing money for ambulances to give to donations to companies like Roco and others as a priority. When we have so many people dying because of lack of ambulances in their constituencies. And the people's representatives gave way. I'm not saying specifically you. I saw most of you disagreeing. But I'm talking of the collective parliament as an institution. So this power must be reclaimed. I don't know how. Maybe, Lope, you will raise a motion for Parliament to vacate the wrong decision they took, that Parliament has no business in the budget business, that your duty is a rubber stamp. I don't know how you're going to go over that wrong precedent that was set, but you need to asserting your functions as clearly stipulated in the Constitution. So what is the critical work of the opposition in the budget process? The former ones have been stated: scrutinizing the budget, proposing alternatives, engaging in debate like we are doing here, and we thank you for this opportunity. So the fourth role is representing citizens' interests. And in here, Right Honorable Leader of Opposition, I want to propose what I think is the voice of the people through the work that I do as regards the budget. Number one is what you stated in your theme, fighting corruption. And under number one, I propose immediate recovery of monies lost through accountability committees as compared to prosecution. Number two is, of course, people refund the money and vacate offices. I think that would be more effective, in my view, than prosecution. Number two is funding the critical sectors of health and education after donor withdrawal of funds. It's not just USAID that is withdrawing funds from critical sectors. I'm sure you have seen the document from Netherlands, also withdrawing aid from critical sectors. And with the rise in the right-wing movement in Europe, and the need for Europe to cover Ukraine gap caused by Trump and climate change gap, a lot of funds are going to be withdrawn. So it's important for our budget to cover the critical sectors of the population, including health and education. If donor funds are to come, let donor funds go to other sectors. But government must treat its people. We were seeing statements after the passing of the anti-homosexuality bill. The executive rushed to assure citizens that they had money, and USAID, US and World Bank can go to hell. But when it came to the critical time of stopping, closing clinics, stopping aid, the executive is nowhere. So where is that money and that force they were talking with during the enactment of AHA? How come we are not seeing the same assertive force that government can cover its obligations amidst donor freeze? The fourth critical sector, in my view, Right Honorable Leader of Opposition, is control of public debt. Public debt, our skyrocketing public debt, is largely linked to corruption. And we borrow money so that we can steal domestically generated revenue, and the citizens will not be alarmed. We need even to budget for this money that IGG has documented that is lost. If IGG is saying 10 trillion is lost, the executive is saying there will be no more corruption. Can we then say that we shall not borrow until this 10 trillion is seen? Because if everybody is saying there will be no corruption, how come we are still losing money? And the Honorable Leader of Opposition, of course, the issues that recently happened regarding the Ministry of Finance and Bank of Uganda were of great concern to the citizens regarding corruption. If you can have people now deciding to steal money at the source, direct from the treasury, then how safe are we as a country? I know that junior staff have been paraded in anti-corruption court with the accountant general, but I don't think that is all that there is in Ministry of Finance. Junior staff do not make any approvals. We have all run little organizations or little businesses. We know who signs off money. Those people should be paraded in court. Number 5, the Honorable Leader of Opposition, you need to stop government bailouts. Until when there is a comprehensive audit of all projects where we have had donations of taxpayers' money, including Lubowa Hospital and others, local construction, we also need a public criteria through which private sector can access taxpayers' money, a known public criteria, so that there is equity on who can access taxpayers' money for their business. It's also important to note that almost all companies where government has bought shares or where bailouts have been made, these companies deliberately keep declaring losses in their audits to defraud citizens. So the other question that we need answered as citizens is, why is it that it's taxpayers' money which goes into loss-making ventures? Why? Everybody posts losses, including Munyonyo. You need to check their audits to the Uganda UDA. You need to check demand for audits of these companies that have received the taxpayers' money or where government has bought shares. They deliberately post losses. Day 1 to day 10, losses. And why should we keep bailing out loss-making ventures as citizens of Uganda? Point I conclude on the priorities is the distortions of the budget through supplementary budgets. It's important to note that supplementary budgets in Uganda, like 90% of supplementary budgets in Uganda, is institutionalized corruption. They do not fit the criteria in the Public Finance Act of unavoidable and unforeseeable, expenditures. They do not fit. They include salaries, they include vehicles, and it's unfortunate that Parliament passes these supplementary budgets. It's just institutionalized corruption. In your alternative budget, you hope that you will declare them as such, and we hope that the other MPs from the other side who are not voting machines can then agree with you in some of these instances. And as I conclude, my last point is on the last-minute budgeting, like the last-minute corrigenda that was presented, I think of about 17 trillion. that was presented in the last budget. We need to move or to see Parliament attempting to shut down government. That was unacceptable. It violated all our laws, as has been read by the director budget. It violated all the procedures of budgeting, and the tyrant of numbers approved it, which was very unfortunate. But you need to put government on notice that even if you have small numbers, but as a voice of reason in the country, you will attempt to shut down government in these circumstances. Honorable Leader of Opposition, I think I have voiced the concerns of the people and civil society, and we have confidence in your leadership and your team that our interests will be taken care of. I thank you very much.